if you give them that space to explore and think a little bit more deeply, they realize that what they thought was the problem is not. I don't see it as a replacement. I don't see those, any kind of AI-driven tools as replacements for educators. I see it as tools for educators. I see it as partners for educators to help adapt the experience for students. But that experience will always include people.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of the LearnIt Podcast, Stories Behind the Chalkboard. Allison, I am super excited to have you joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dheeraj. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to be in this space that you've created for educators to have some really important conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you come with incredible experience. So I'm really, genuinely, really excited to get into that experience. And also, I feel like there is a lot of what you've accomplished that is also unique to your journey that hopefully others can also learn from in terms of, their own growth in education.
Great. I hope so.
We'll dive right in and we'll go, straight to your childhood first. So I'd love for you to take us back to your childhood. What would your teachers have said about you? Your parents have said about you? What was it like growing up?
Yes. Such an important question. And it's a really nice thing to sort of reflect on. And I appreciate this opportunity to reflect on it. I would say, first and foremost, I grew up on Lake Simcoe in the 1980s, a very, very small town, rural town just north of the city. I enjoyed being in the outdoors a lot. I was a bit of an adventurer. Most of my friends lived on farms surrounding the town. I was a town kid. I did have friends that lived on farms, and there was a lot of freedom. There was a lot of freedom to explore. There were a lot of bike rides. There was a lot of canoeing. There was a lot of ice fishing, hiking, you name it. I was outside a lot. But while I was quite an adventurer, I was also quite cautious. I think this is what my parents would have said about me is I was the oldest child. I was quite cautious. I have a younger sister. I really looked out for her. And particularly in school, I would show up to her teacher's door and sort of say, what homework does she have today?
Like
does she have everything she needs?
Yeah.
Yes, I sort of took on that role naturally, I guess, for her. So yes, my parents would say adventurous but cautious, calculated risk taker, I think would be fair. But also my teachers would say the same about the cautious, the same about the adventure. But I had to work really hard in high school. In particular, school did not come easily to me, I would say. I did have to work really hard. I really valued the opportunity in the work. Like I loved learning. I loved school. I made friends easily. I think my teachers would say that. And I just loved to explore everything high school had to offer, between sports and student council and the arts, particularly band. It was just a wonderful time. I had a really great experience of high school, and I know I'm lucky to say that because sadly I know a lot of students don't. But I had great teachers, really wonderful teachers, excellent track and field coach in particular, who was so invested in progress and supporting me to reach goals, as were my teachers. Special shout out to my geography teachers, I would say, and outdoor ed. I must mention that too. Yeah,
and did you find that being in that environment or being around those teachers is what drew your inspiration into going into education yourself, or was that drawn from somewhere else?
Yes, such a good question, because I think when I reflect on that, there's a lot of inspiration there. I didn't necessarily, my whole life want to be a teacher. However, both of my parents were teachers. My father was actually in advertising, a creative director in advertising, but went on to become an art teacher. And then, those jobs expired about age 35. So he had to move on. And he came into art, and my mom was a Latin and a phys ed teacher. I came by that naturally. I had aunts and uncles who were teachers. So it was definitely in my family. But I would say I didn't follow that path intentionally, really, but there were a few little experiences that kind of nudged me in that direction. And I would say one that really stands out to me was something that happened in high school. I was part of our outdoors club or outers club, and we would go on trips to Algonquin, Killarney with some regularity throughout the school year. And at one point, this would have been when I was in grade 11, we were on a canoe trip. There's about 8 boats. you can easily tell who knows how to stern a canoe and who doesn't. And I ended up in this boat with a young guy who was in my class, and he was really struggling. Really struggling. He was the kind of kid that nobody else wanted him in the boat. He had a lot of emotional challenges, I would say. He had no idea, how to stern the boat. There was a lot of frustration on his part, and certainly with our peers. And when he ended up in my boat, it was like this challenge because I had this empathy for him. I knew he had a hard life, and I just really wanted him to master the J-stroke, and I sort of took it on. Like, I want this kid to master the J-stroke, not just because I want him to have this skill and to, get our boat up to speed with everybody else, but I want him to actually feel like he belongs, because it was really obvious to me that he struggled with that in this particular context and environment of being out on a lake in Algonquin Park. And I don't know, I just really took it on. And in that moment, I sort of thought, I have these feelings for kids who, or people in general, who maybe are out of their element. They want to belong. They don't belong. There's a struggle. I just wanted to reach out. And so that was the start for me of a path in education. I love people. I love talking with people. I love, connecting with people, hearing their stories. And I really love to see kids in particular achieve. And part of that also came from my camp experiences. I went to camp for many, many years. I always joke with my students that I never had a job inside until I started teaching. So there were a lot of influences. Those are just a few.
Yeah, I mean, that's very mature for a young girl,
It just kind of came out of nowhere. And I just had this mission, I want to teach this kid the J-stroke.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where, at least for me, when I was growing up, I used to do small bits and pieces of teaching, because I started when I was 12, and I would go to a class and teach. And there was a bit of naivety there, but, I didn't know that it was, something I loved or super passionate about, because it was there was just a feeling of being able to work with someone and help them out. And I think a lot of educators have that. Maybe, it's that sort of tingling in them that says, I want to help this person get from point A to point B.
That's it.
And I haven't shared this publicly, but there's this crazy story. Once I was in university, and I would do tutoring.
Yes.
And it was my way of making money, because I was an international student. It was really expensive.
Yeah.
And I would tutor for probably close to 30, 40 hours a week.
Oh my gosh.
So
it's a second job.
Yeah. I would tutor every day after my co-op was done. I'll come home and I'll tutor every day from 5 to 12.
Right.
Almost every day, just 5 to 12, 5 to 12, 5 to 12. And my friends would be like, don't you get bored? Or aren't you tired? And for some reason, I would never feel tired unless it was the last at the end. I'm like, okay, now I'm super tired.
Yes.
But there's just this drive that sort of pushes you to do more and to help more people that I think a lot of people in education have as well, which I think is what brings us all together.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's always that excitement that it's never the same.
Yeah.
Every kid is different. Every class is different. It doesn't matter if it's, technically the same curriculum, the same projects. You were going to always approach them differently based on who's in the class. Yeah. So it is one of the things I appreciate most about education. Never dull.
It's never a dull moment.
Never. No.
And, you transition now into Havergal's team.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know sort of what that experience is like for you, and what is your focus at Havergal right now?
Yes. So I came to Havergal this fall, and I joined the HCX team. And HCX is the innovation hub at Havergal. And so the first question a lot of people say to me is what is that? And so it's very exciting.
Sounds pretty cool.
It's very cool. Yes, it's very exciting. It is really an experimental space. And it's characterized by three projects at the moment, three main projects at the moment, with a few other things on the back burner. And the most recent project I've been involved with is TC9. And so it stands for the Challenge Grade 9. And it's a transdisciplinary project. All the grade 9s for 2 weeks after March break were taken off timetable. So they're off timetable for 2 full weeks. And we explore SDG 13, which is climate action. And we do it through many different lenses, I would say. The nice thing is that it's a nice mix of guest speakers. There are workshops. Some of those things are hands-on. There's a lot of opportunity for creativity. We have a couple of excursions, one to the Toronto Zoo, where we partnered with Jane Goodall Foundation, for example, and really looked at this concept embedded within Indigenous ways of knowing and being and doing, which is two-eyed seeing. So how do we look at biodiversity through the lens of an Indigenous perspective at the zoo, and how do we look at it through the perspective of the zoo and the animal keepers there? And so that was one example of a field trip. We also worked with another organization, Maximum City, to bring us down here to the waterfront and look at the portlands and try to understand a bit about how is Toronto sort of mitigating and adapting to climate change. And getting out in the field is just really great. One of the things I thought was wonderful and very exciting about the project this year was working in futures thinking. And that this is something that I've recently been learning and sort of leveling up on. And so the students had a series of futures workshops woven in to the 9 days or 2 weeks off timetable, where they were using a foresight tool called a futures triangle. So looking at this idea of what is the future of climate action. And that's really where the seed gets planted for the students to say, what is the step I'm going to take? So we look at where are we stuck in the past around climate action? What's holding us back? Things like dependence on or over-reliance on fossil fuels. We talked a lot about how futurists look at trends. So what are some of the trends in the present that are taking us towards climate action, really focusing on that positivity, which I think is important for students. And then getting creative and getting into that sort of what if scenario. So, you've heard a lot from different speakers. We have looked at the different trends that are possible, bringing us towards different climate futures. What are your preferred futures now? Yeah. And so for students to kind of outline that and then decide what is a step that's an actionable step I can take in the direction of my preferred future. So that's sort of where we went with it. That's one of the main projects. The other one is digital wisdom programming, and it is for grades 5 to 8. I myself have been really just involved with the middle school from grades 7 to 8. And this is a sort of made in Havergal program. It is not a ministry course, although it draws a lot on a lot of the, particularly the skills, 21st century skills that the ministry is outlining in their documents. But what I love about that is it is focusing on digital citizenship, using AI and digital creativity. So it isn't a traditional, learn tech course. It is not that at all. It is a lot more about thinking about well-being, integrity, and ethics, and just engaging as digital citizens, which I think is really extremely important
especially at that
the students
age
we
too,
teach.
right?
Especially at that age, yes. Right. And a lot of kids are involved with social media, understanding AI, but even in grade 7, some of them aren't yet. And so I say to them, how great, because you have some decisions that you're going to have to make. And I'm happy that we are here preparing you to make those decisions. So that's another piece of it. And then there's the micro-credentials. Lots of examples of this. So micro-credentials are smaller sort of bite-sized offerings that we have that the students do on top of the OSSD. They're a bit of a differentiator. We come up with these based on student input. We sort of design to spec there in terms of what students are interested in, what the offerings that we see as valuable are. So to give you some examples, some students have participated in a pre-med micro-credential. This happens after school a couple times a week for sort of 4 to 8 weeks. It's run through Harvard. And, we just support the students to engage in that and obtain this credential. Other examples in that same medical field would be Havergal's Next Surgeon. Now, this is actually offered not through HCX, but through sort of another partner organization or department within Havergal, which is called Forum for Change. And the Next Surgeon program partners with St. Mike's Hospital here in Toronto. And it's wonderful. It runs on a couple of Saturdays where the students go down. They partner with the people down there at St. Mike's, and they have a bit more of a hands-on learning experience. We sort of co-design some of the modules that get uploaded online on our LMS system for students to kind of do some preparatory work prior to the experiential piece of that credential. One that I've been more involved with this year is the architecture micro-credential. And that has been a lot of fun, co-designed with students because of their interest, partnered with MJMA Studios and also Lou Webb right here in Toronto. And we've had a number of really exciting excursions. We've been down to TMU to check out, what does it look like when you come into first year architecture at TMU. And we had some instruction around 2D drawings and what the experience of a critique is like at TMU. can be quite terrifying for students. So kind of nice to get some experience with the critique. And then we've also been to MJMA to do a little bit about designing some interiors boards we were also sort of had some hands-on experience with site planning and looking at specific sites and, pros and cons, and heard a little bit about community involvement, all the aspects that, what the job is of an architect. So those have been a lot of fun. Our final excursion with architecture is coming up next week, and it's a site visit to the Pam McConnell Aquatic Center in Regent Park. We're going to sort of contrast that downtown site with a more greenfield site out at Churchill Meadows, closer to Mississauga, and just give the students a little bit of an idea about, what does the community consultation look like when you are, dealing with a downtown site versus a rural site or a, I guess, more suburban site. So that's architecture. There's a pre-law on the docket, and we're always expanding. So, so that's micro-credentials. And that kind of wraps up the majority of what we do. But, within HCX, there are also other spaces like the Virtual Learning Lab, where students are getting some experience with VR, and we're working with teachers about how we can integrate that into the program, their own courses and programs. We have an AI learning team where teachers and other staff members come together to sort of trial and error things. And again, experimentation is really important here, and we're always trying new things. One of the new things that we are currently working on is the implementation of Flint AI. And so that is something that just has more guardrails around student use and AI.
Yeah.
ChatGPT is wide open, and so we haven't opened that up to students, but we are working with Flint and working with a number of different teachers to sort of experiment. Amazing projects are coming out of every department, French language conversations, social studies teachers working on talking with different historians, in sort of character. I've seen things around disaster preparedness and, what does that look like when you are in the situation? What's the preparation and mitigation looking like? It's also been used a lot by learning strategies and helping students who need different accommodations. So there's some exciting work happening in the area of AI, and some of that runs through HCX as well.
No, very cool. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned, because I've actually exchanged emails with Soham, their founder at Flint.
Oh, fascinating.
And, he's an incredible person.
Yes.
And I think they have a lot of attention to how students can use AI in a way that's productive to them. And I think they're building for those use cases, right?
Yes.
I think that's where their focus is. So I think, it's exciting to hear, because, to see it come to life in Canadian schools as well.
Yes.
And I think it's a great platform to use for a lot of schools.
It has been wonderful, I think. And, but certainly, we approach with caution, and the AI learning team, I think, is really important for that, to just sort of bounce those ideas off, what's working, but also, what am I not seeing here? Is there anything else you would recommend that I try? I really enjoy that kind of engagement with my colleagues, just to kind of know what's happening and how can we push some things forward? Because the most important thing is understanding the human in the loop. And I say this all the time to my digital wisdom students, if we're going to use this, how do you stay the human in the loop? Because what's most important here is we're still working on critical thinking skills in traditional ways, still working on creative thinking skills, still working on collaboration. And all of those are sort of the human skills that keeps the AI use in check. And so I think that's also really important.
Yeah. No, that is absolutely wonderful. And one of the things that I'd love to get your insight on, Allison, is that you also pursued your Master of Designing, right?
Yes.
And that is something that I think is very unique.
Yes.
And in parallel, you're being an awesome mom at the same time, right? So I think I'd love for you to share with everyone, how did you, what was that Master of Design about, instead of how you approach it, but also what did that balance look like in building a career, all while thinking about your master's as well as being a good parent?
Yes. Well, organized chaos, more or less. But I think this is such a great question, because it's the kind of thing I asked a lot of mentors of mine, when I was thinking about it. And I had been thinking about the Master of Design. So it was a Master of Design at OCAD University here in Toronto. And it was called Strategic Foresight and Innovation. So, it was it really focused on systems and frameworks for thinking, and a lot of sort of business design was kind of the angle. And so I think, when I first got that pamphlet, I remember it was many years before I did the program, and I pinned it up, on my bulletin board, which is what I do when I want to do something, but I know I can't necessarily do it right away. I pin it up there. And I think, just something that is an overarching kind of philosophy for me in this realm is really a woman's career in particular is a long game, and there are shifts, there are pauses, and I think it's really important to talk about them, and embrace that. So yes, I was part-time for 13 years as an educator when I had my sons. And it was just important for me to try to keep a foot in both worlds. Loved my career, wanted to maintain as much time as I could during those important young growth and development years with my boys. Not easy for anybody, either partner, for sure, not easy, but extremely rewarding. And I was grateful beyond belief to even have the opportunity to do that. So that was important. But as I started to see my kids become more independent, I started to look at that brochure, and I started to say, I still want to do this. I think it's really important for my career. As I'm coming back into looking at going back into full-time work again,
Right.
I want to sort of upskill, and the decision to do the Master of Design was really because I was curious about what is the future going to look like in education, and how can I be part of that sort of in this later part of my career? What is it going to look like? What do I want to be part of? What do I want to work towards in this sort of last couple of chapters? Who knows how many more chapters, but there'll be a few still. And so what appealed to me about OCAD's Master of Design in Strategic Foresight and Innovation was part of me wanting to understand the independent school system a little bit better. So of course, having 25 years worth of experience as a teacher, I understood that role really well. But when we start to think about the roles that might appeal to me for the next chapter in my career, it was about, well, what are the systems that are in place? And how do we connect that to system change? How do we look at culture change around the future of education? And how do we actually do that? And so I really saw some synergy between what OCAD was offering, which was really looking at systems thinking, how to become good at systems thinking, how to connect that to design thinking. So, how with systems, how are you framing the problems? With design thinking, how are you designing the solutions? And then with futures thinking, trying to really understand what are the multiple potential futures we're designing for. And so all of those frameworks really nested inside each other quite well. And so I was interested in that because I'm passionate about education. I'm also passionate about change and recognizing that, when the paradigm needs to shift and move on, we have to be bold and courageous enough to do that. And it's not easy at all. But I wanted to learn some skills. I wanted to learn some frameworks. I wanted to get some tools to sort of help me collaborate with my peers in education to see what this next phase and what this paradigm shift, I think we are in it or getting started. What does it look like?
Yeah. Some of the most difficult decisions turn out to be the best, right? So It's one of those things where if it's hard, that means it's hard for a reason.
Yes.
It's probably because you're thinking, right? And
it
shows your willingness to continue to learn.
Yes.
Always.
Yes.
Like never stop learning.
Never stop.
It's
Never
it's
stop
a
learning.
mindset.
Exactly.
Right? And
exactly.
those active steps to say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to push forward.
Yes.
I'm going to take that step. I think those really show that mindset as well, more than just speaking about it.
Yes.
I love that. I love that. And in your view, being in the program and now, with decades of experience in education, what do you feel is one of the misconceptions that a lot of people from the outside have about education, and how would you change that?
Oh, yeah. There are so many.
Yes.
I'm sure that there are so many misconceptions. I think probably the one that feels most current right now, and, it's the talk among educators. It's also the talk among families. It's the talk among our students is education going to be, or teachers, are they going to be somehow replaced by AI? And,
I hope not.
Is AI going to change student engagement? So I feel like there's perhaps a bit of a misconception that it will just erase the role of educators, which I really don't believe. I think we are all, as I mentioned earlier, we are all still learning about where AI falls in terms of its utility. for educators, for education at large, of course, for students, families, all of it. But the simple fact is that education is a really human endeavor. And teachers and students and our partners, be they parents or industry, we need that human contact. We need to be able to develop empathy. We need to still teach critical thinking. We need to inspire creativity. We need to look at what's next together. And, AI is a predictive machine. It can tell us a lot about, the data that it already has, but it needs that human, students, education, we all need the human sort of boundary around it all to sort of say, here's where we use these things. I don't see it as a replacement. I don't see those, any kind of AI-driven tools as replacements for educators. I see it as tools for educators. I see it as partners for educators to help adapt the experience for students. But that experience will always include people.
Yeah. I mean, how would they then build the skills that they need to even people will be around, right?
Exactly.
AI will be too, and that's fine, right? But
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, any type of organization, whether it's a car wash or a hospital, there's going to be people there, right? And so how do you,
we
learn
need
the
each
skills
other.
and how do you develop the skills, right? And that comes from the high fives in the hallway.
That's right.
To the laughs and all of that is all human element to education.
Yes. There's a lot of emotion, in education. There's a lot of emotion. And I think, if the pandemic showed us anything, it's that for sure, we need to be together.
Yes, 100%.
We need to be together. We need to learn together. And we need that sort of emotional connection. It's very intangible, but tangible all at the same time.
Especially at the age that they're at too.
You got it.
They required much more than when they grow older.
Absolutely.
Right?
But I think we all need it, even the adults. We need each other. I think we sort of feed off of that. At least in my perspective, I find I feed off of my colleagues. Better
energy,
ideas
everything
are always built together.
Yeah.
Always.
I love that. And you were talking a little bit about the program and sort of the futures thinking and the design thinking. How have some of those learnings sort of come to life through your role at Havergal or through curriculum building or through the micro-credentials?
Yeah.
How do you see those applications come to life?
Sure. Yeah, really good question. So as I say, I do believe they're nested qualities. And I think what's really important about the way I'm looking at curriculum currently is that they're really useful for project-based learning. So like the TC9 project that we were talking about earlier, transdisciplinary learning or interdisciplinary learning, anytime there is that opportunity for project-based, real-world connections, anytime we can draw on community partnerships to help build student learning, anytime we can encourage students to look at complex problems and just sort of understand the steps to take, right? So what I'm looking at is, you start with sort of the systems thinking. So whatever that problem is, if it's climate action, if it's moving from linear economies to circular economies, you look at the system. And give you a great example, like one of the tools we used in SFI a lot at OCAD was a causal layer analysis. Sometimes people call it the iceberg model. And sure, we're doing that at a super high level, right? But when you work with it, you can actually bring that down to a student level. And I find that really exciting. So if you start with a project, you start with a system and you say, let's take textile waste as an example. So there was a project I did with some students a while back, grade 8s. They were just grade 8s. And I said, okay, if we look at this causal layer, let's start at the top with your litany. And that's really saying, what are the headlines? What do we know is problematic? And the kids might say, they can say to you, oh, I read somewhere that, textile waste is visible from space. I say, yeah, okay, that's a problem, right? And then they say, okay, we work our way back down through the litany to sort of, what are some of the problems in the system? Like, where is this coming from? And they'll say, well, people really like changing up their style season to season. Fashion Week shows you what is coming for the fall or the summer, and we change it all the time. We also really like cheap clothes. Say, okay, great. Now let's go to that deepest level, which is really about a worldview. What do we actually believe about this issue that is influencing this entire system? And kids will say, well, it doesn't really seem like, especially if they're talking about like we were able to contribute to this fast fashion, world of fast fashion. And they'll say, it doesn't really seem like we value ethics over profit or fashion. Like we don't value ethics over being fashionable. I'll say, yeah, that might be part of a belief system if you really look at it. So then you start talking about where do we intervene in that system? And the kids have all kinds of ideas. And this is what's great about actually using those really big tools with younger kids is they aren't intimidated.
Yeah.
They just go for it, and they'll start talking about all these places to intervene. And, in this particular project, we were looking at upcycling and we were looking at textiles. And so that was the project. And I said, well, if we want to understand how to conserve textiles more and not contribute to this issue, now let's bring this into a design frame. How can you design this particular material? We were looking at materials upcycling. How can we design this material specifically to combat this problem? So you have to bring a massive issue down to a very micro level.
Yeah.
But with the right scaffolding, you could do that, know. And then if you want to layer in futures, you can do that too. You can kind of say, well, what are the futures of linear economies, or what are the future of what are the futures of any kinds of economies now? And you have to give them the scaffolds, and they can get there. Even the youngest kids can get there. I really believe that. So I think this is valuable because kids need to see learning in a real world context. They need to take issues that they see in the headlines, issues that resonate with them, whether it's fashion or whatever it is. And they need to feel like they can do something about it. They need to feel like there's some hope. And I actually think that that's the thing about futures thinking that I'm most passionate about, is that it's really an antidote sort of to our times right now, to a lot of the things that stress kids out, like climate change, like politics. Yeah. They need to believe that there's hope, and they need to believe that they're part of that and that they have agency in building better futures.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I mean, they are going to be building our future.
They are. So exactly.
The earlier they learn these methods, and it's really an approach to solving problems.
You
right?
got it.
And
you got it.
It's more about how do we, unwrap it slowly and get to the real problem, not what we think necessarily the problem is, but what really the problem is. And I think it's very powerful for kids to have that mindset.
Yes.
That early on in their journey.
Yes.
Because it'll only get better.
You got it.
As they solve more problems.
Yeah. And I think you really nailed it. They're like, this is the critical thinking piece, that if you give them that space to explore and think a little bit more deeply, they realize that what they thought was the problem is not the problem.
Yeah.
And you ask the questions. There are different actors.
You ask the right questions.
And you ask the right questions. And so they engage in the thinking. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. I love that. That's a beautiful answer. And I'm going to shift gears here into a rapid fire round.
Yes, so bring it.
I'll give you a question, and then you can hit me with a response in a minute.
Sure.
So first question I have for you is one word to describe your leadership style.
Great. I would say authentic.
Authentic?
I would say authentic.
Beautiful. What's one thing you've changed your mind on recently?
Do you know what? I'm going to go maybe off script here a little bit, but I was having this chat with somebody the other day. Turns out I don't love yoga.
I don't blame you.
It's like this is not about education right now. But
it doesn't have to be.
But you know what? Like, everyone wants to love yoga. And I've decided I like Pilates better. Yeah. I don't love yoga.
I was going to ask about popular. Pilates after that.
I may have lost some friends just now, but I don't love yoga.
At least you like Pilates. And I think you'll have lost a lot more friends if
we
you
have to do something. But for me, it's not going to be yoga.
I love it. That's good. That's a great answer. What is one part of your daily routine that you can't skip? Don't say yoga.
I won't. Yeah. Good point. I would say it's the tuck-in at the end of the day. So, of course, my sons, they're older, they're entering their teenage years now. It does not look the same as when they were little, right? It is not about reading the same story 18 times, so much so that I memorized and, we have a nice cuddle. It has evolved, but that ritual is still really important to me and to them. And so I never miss it.
That's really nice. What time do they sleep?
Oh, geez.
I was going to ask them.
Don't ask. I know. Not early enough.
I was never good at that. Right. My mom would tell you. Yeah.
Yes.
If you could redesign one thing about our current education system, what would it be and why?
Yeah. No. This, I mean, I have so many thoughts on this, but I think I would go with. My children are part of the public education system, which of course is a behemoth. And so one of the things that I would say if I was gonna endeavor to redesign any aspect of that system would be the funding formula. Yeah, the funding formula for schools.
I like that. That's good. I mean, I've heard that from a lot of people too.
Yes,
So.
I think I might have a good team.
Yeah, absolutely. If you could swap jobs with anyone for a day, who would it be?
Love it. Love this. Yayoi Kusama. She's a Japanese artist that sort of works in large immersive installations, And I just, her exhibit at the AGO was so awe-inspiring. So much color, so much pattern, so much infinity, otherworldly universes. And I think to be in that headspace for a day would just be a treat.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably something in
would
that
just be
line.
a treat for sure.
I like it. Very nice. A student moment that made you smile recently.
Yes, just yesterday, something quite lovely happened. So I'm in my grade 7 class, and these students are relatively new to me. We had just started working together maybe like 2-3 weeks ago. And this student says to me, Miss Campbell-Rogers, who are your friends here? Like, I know you're new to the school. Do you have some friends? And I said, yeah, I'm building some relationships. I have some wonderful colleagues here. She said, I really think that you would get along well with Miss So-and-so. And she said, and furthermore, I actually think the whole social science department you'd really enjoy them. And you should just go and poke your head in there and maybe have lunch. And I said, I just might do that. And funny you should say that, because I've really enjoyed talking to a lot of the social scientists, and that's sort of my background by training. And I just loved that here is this 13-year-old student looking out for me, making new friends, which, is wonderful. Like, just
that is so
wonderful,
sweet.
because generally the teachers are really looking out for the middle schoolers in that area of social, connection. And it was very touching that she was concerned about, am I making friends at my new school?
That is so cute. I love that. That is so adorable. Oh my God, that's beautiful. And I'm going to throw in a question here that wasn't on the script.
Okay.
Sorry,
okay. That's all right.
What is something you have done as an educator or a teacher that you think a lot of people haven't done, but they should do more of?
Take a sabbatical.
Okay.
Yes. And there's lots of terms for that. 4/5, 3/4, whatever it is. I did a 4/5 in 2008, and it was honestly one of the best things to stay refreshed, to stay curious. Because so important for educators to stay curious. And I mean, most of us, that's why we're here, because we are naturally curious, but you can always use a little boost. And I did some wonderful things. I hiked the Camino Santiago with my husband. I went to Argentina to learn Spanish.
Wow.
I did a contract with an organization called Canada World Youth, working on their global learner programs. Just a chance to do something different and do things that remind you why you love educating, connect you to what it's like to be a learner. It doesn't matter what you do. Whatever it is that you want to do, you should do it. You should just make time and do it.
Yeah, it's oftentimes the hardest thing to do.
Yes,
sort
it
of
is.
Stuck in your day.
You got to prioritize it.
Yeah.
It was great.
I love that. And the last question on our rapid fire: what's one thing you've learned from your students?
I would say grace. I would say grace, because every time you enter a classroom, you have to remember the kids are all coming in with stuff, like there's stuff they come into your classroom with, and you don't know what it is. You may never know what it is. And I always try to remember that you have to approach in that way. You have to just know that some things might be, more challenging or less able to engage in for certain students at given times. Try to remember to have grace. But I also think it goes the other way, because of course, teachers are human. We walk into the classroom with stuff too. And there have been times when it's been a hard day, and I don't know what it is. It's this very unique relationship between a teacher and their students. They sometimes know. I don't know what it is, but I can tell you that sometimes on a bad day, the kids give you that. They give you some grace. They give you that space. And I don't know what it is, but I've seen it. And so I think it's a two-way street. Yeah, it's all about grace.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for that rapid fire round, Allison. So we're going to move on to our final question.
Yes.
So a little bit of a tradition here. We've got a question from one of our previous guests, and then you'll get to leave a question for one of our next guests.
Fantastic.
So I don't know these either, so we'll find out together.
Okay.
It's always a fun part. Let's see. Okay. So this question is from Leanne Foster, principal at UTS.
Great.
And her question is, what is one thing you need to stop doing in order to be a better leader?
Oh, this is a great question. I think, for me, the most important thing, and I'm trying to think of how to focus it as a stop doing. But what I'm thinking about is being present. I think leaders have so much on the plate. So I guess, it's about multitasking. Like, try to really be aware of when you're multitasking. Because I think when you are engaged in meeting and collaboration with others, it's really important to be present with your team. And so I would say, try to stop multitasking.
That's actually very true, because you do get busier.
Yes, it's natural. And of course, it makes sense. But I think there's a time to multitask and a time to try to
sit
really
down and just
be
listen.
present with your teams. Yeah.
I love that. All right. So we'll have you, Allison, leave a question for our next guest.
Wonderful.
It could be something personal. It could be something professional.
Do I get to know who it is?
No.
Okay.
You don't. It's always a surprise. It's fun that way.
All right. So I'm going to do my best handwriting here. Okay. Good test. Okie doke.
Okay.
Better check my handwriting.
I think I could read that. That's perfectly fine.
Excellent.
Thanks for the question. Well, thank you all for listening in today. Allison, this has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Me too.
Blessing us with your grace. You're so kind. You're so warm. So thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Again, it's a pleasure to be here, Dheeraj. And again, I thank you for opening the space to educators. I've enjoyed listening to everybody else's conversations with you, and I think we're all learning a lot. So
thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, take care.